This is another in the First Read series where I read a poem by a poet I don't know or know very little about. I just do this for the sheer joy of it, not to teach it or explain it, but just to have a first experience and record that, because initially that's what got me into poetry in the first place. So this one is from Anna Zumbahlen, and it's called And the City. It is posted on the Doozy blogspot by Rob McLennan. He does this daily poem project. As you can see, Tuesday poem number 510. Rob is a great Canadian poet, so you should check out this series. So this one. And the City. When I look at a poem, I always like to start with the form. So I'm going to look at this one just briefly. I picked these randomly. I never know whether the double spacing is on purpose. Sometimes people send out their poems that way and they get printed that way, whether they should have been that way or not. So I'm going to assume it's on purpose here. We'll see. The lines are not consistent links. I'm assuming this is not a traditional form. Will the memory abduct the terms of a shift for whose benefit? All right, so the lines have different syllable links. If I'm guessing here, I could go through and count them up, but I'd guess it's between 8 and maybe 12 or 13 syllables per line. Terms, benefit, glare, near, or shift. I'm not seeing any specific rhyme on the end of it too, so I'm just going to look at this as an open form poem, which is very common these days. So this was And the City. And the City. Will the memory abduct the terms of a shift for whose benefit the image of a window, afternoon glare, slush in the road? Okay. So I'm looking at these first couple lines, and there's some stuff, it looks like intentionally left out of here, that makes it a little bit difficult to reconstruct a narrative of this, but I'm not sure a narrative is what's being gone for in this poem. Will the memory abduct the terms of a shift? I'm not sure what a shift means. It could just be a shift of perspective. It could be a shift as this larger poetic term this person is playing with. I'm not sure. Or any kind of shift that you have in life, will the memory abduct that the terms that you use to explain that shift and reconstruct them in some other different way. I'm not sure if that's what's being played with here, but it's it could be about perception, how we perceive or how we use language to describe how we understand the world. For whose benefit the image of a window, afternoon glare, slush in the road. So we have a fragment here, and in that fragment it's a question or a statement. We're not really sure. We don't have a question mark at the end. And if it weren't a fragment, we could have maybe attached this to the sentence before, this to the sentence after. We don't really know. But for whose benefit the image of a window, afternoon glare, slush in the road? Whose benefit are these things for? If they're for somebody's benefit, if they just exist that way, or in memory, are they being reconstructed for some kind of benefit? I'm not really sure. It's not asked as a question. So it could be, if you connected it to the sentence before, if there were no period there, but there is, memory abduct term of a shift for whose benefit, the actual benefit of these images would be for the memory of that person specifically. Step nearer, we're told. A very short sentence here, a command to step nearer. Step nearer to what? The image of the window, the afternoon glare, or the poem itself, or to the concept that memory is reconstructing these things. I'm not sure. We're nebulous waters because we don't really have a speaker at this point, and we're not sure what the presence is behind it. Not too close. So step near, not too close. And there's that pushback on this of space. The scene shifts before I shift. So we have a speaker here. There's an I. We're not sure what to do with this presence of the I first, but the scene shifts. So the scene in the poem shifts, is that's what's happening, or the actual scene in front of the speaker? And a shift is only a shift of scenes themselves. If that's the case, it's kind of interesting to start the poem with the idea of a shift, because it's as if the poem is shifting from some other thing, like the poem exists in some kind of narrative landscape that it's shifting into at that moment. This is, at the, beginning and the middle of things concept. But I'm not sure that we're dealing with that. Scene shifts before I shift, so the scene's changing before I change, before I shift. A sudden consonance, or the continual problem of enclosure and becoming. A sudden consonance, that sudden coming together of these sounds together, which brings back that idea of like language, how we understand the spaces around us, the scenes around us, the shifts we go through in life, or just the shifts of language, that they have these sudden moments where we recognize the sounds all together, or where they are all together, right? Whether we recognize them or not. Or the continual problem of enclosure and becoming, of being enclosed and becoming. This kind of growth inside this enclosure. This could play on lots of things. It could be some kind of personal thing, but also it could be this language or memory, when memory encloses something and still, the story continues, memory reconstructs, becomes something. Or language itself encloses a scene. When you recognize that consonants, you've somehow enclosed the language that's explaining the scene, and then you watch it, you explain it, and become through it. I recognize myself speaking, and my observation become a question. So these two lines make me feel like maybe that initial reading was on, when I was talking about language and memory, or how we understand the world. Earlier, that was, a loose interpretation on the text, and not, I would say, a close read yet of the text. But here it seems to suggest that is actually the idea that's being played with. I recognize myself speaking, and my observations become a question. And becomes a question. This is that second line, which we couldn't tell whether it was an observation or a question. And you might not recognize it till you take a look back as written text to understand it. Because when somebody says it, you can't hear it the same way. The question mark signals it to us as a reader in a way that sometimes intonation might do that as in real speech, as long as that person is clear in how they do it. And that's recognizing myself, is this kind of the recognizing this image of oneself. My sentences have subjectivitis. Subjectivities. See, when you read it the first time through, you can misread it as well. Subjectivities, and I impose some order. Well, this is kind of playing around with that idea of memory early on. Was it going to abduct the terms of a shift? Is this memory in language itself, as, through a subject, taking these images that have been put there and reordering, invoking something with them, like taking that image of a window and afternoon glare and slush in the road and turning them into some meaning, some story that might or might not apply, but is a aspect of the subject who's doing this. And I'll hold on to that. To hold you. And to hold you is separate. This infinitive phrase here is separate as a fragment itself. There's a lot of these kind of non-sentences, so you're not really sure how they connect to the other sentences. This feels kind of important in this poem. To hold you, which brings up that idea of enclosure and becoming. Is this a story or an order that's becoming? Is it a way to enclose? And who is the you? Is it some other person that's trying to be enclosed, or is it the I, that subject that's being enclosed? The weather variable in precisely this way: thin light, thin sleep, and clear blue into gray, which is interesting because weather is not really sleep. It doesn't really fit into this category. The other two, you can kind of see how they work that way. So it's as if something in the outer world has been rearranged through the language being used to explain it. What exactly are the physics of this shift? Which is interesting because we're still not sure what the shift is, and we begin and end this poem with the shift. Is it the shift into the poem as its own space, so that you have to rearrange the language to understand what the poem is saying? That's happens in any poem. We don't always do it in a conscious way, but we're doing it when we read a poem. Or is it the actual some experience in someone's life that memory is abducting those elements and reordering it into some narrative that makes sense that you can then use? We do this quite a lot in life too. We take a memory that we focus on that becomes important to us that somebody else in the scene might not even pay that much attention to, but it becomes important to us and becomes an ordering figure in our life in a way that other things might not. Or is it just narrative? This is about the narrative. Once you're inside of a literary object, what are the physics? Have they been let go? I mean, this is, in the literary objects, we allow for things that don't happen in the real world of physics shift and change, and we can imagine them into other things. And this is how things like sci-fi and stuff works, or like superhero stuff. We've rearranged the physics of this space. What is the physics of this specific space? So it's almost like asking, what does this specific writer do? Like, do we have to have an understanding of the aesthetics of this writer to understand this poem? Interesting poem. It brings up a lot of questions, and this is Anna Zumbahlen, and there's a little bit about this person. I don't know. It should be pretty current because of when this poem was out, 2023. So, a member of the PhD program at the University of Denver, lives in Albuquerque. There's a website for her, so if you're interested in that, I'd be interested to see more of these. I'm kind of curious to see if this concept of a shift is part of a collection, and if this would, run through and be thought through in other poems. So it's worthwhile to follow this poet to see what happens.